now that we have a complete understanding of how the application is loaded and what is the role of the startup class, configure service and configure method, let us focus more upon how is actually dependency injection implemented or facilitated, and mostly this is happening through configure service method. The configure service method in the startup. So what is dependency injection? Dependency injection is a technique for achieving loose coupling between the object and its collaborators or dependencies. In simplest language, if I say, if I have two classes CA and CB, I don't want CA to directly depend on CB. So what CA does? CA says, I am going to use IB and IB will be implemented by CB. And CB is going to be injected into CA, which it will capture in IB. Obviously, what is the advantage? Today it is CB. It can be tomorrow CB1. It can be day after CB2. So any object of the class which is implementing the interface IB can be injected into CA. Thus, we are establishing a loose coupling between the object and its dependency. These are all dependencies. This is what CA is dependent upon. But it is not directly dependent upon. It is doing through interface, and interface can refer to any of the object. But CA at the same time does not want to write, CA in its constructor does not want to write something like this. Because if CA writes this, then also CA is dependent on CB. CA doesn't want this. So that is where the dependency injection frameworks come into the picture. ASP.NET Core has built-in dependency injection abilities. So what we are going to do in ASP.NET Core is, when we write the class CA, to its constructor we will provide a parameter which is of type IB. So whenever there is an object of class CA getting created by the framework, automatically the dependency injection framework which is built in ASP.NET Core will do this for us and give us the object. But somewhere ASP.NET Core should be told that if IB is requested, CB should be provided. Somewhere it has to be done that way. And that is what we are going to do it in the configure service method of startup. And to achieve that, we use services.addTransient, and this is where we provide the interface and the class. So after we write this code, this line, suppose I write, imagine for a while, in my startup class, I have configure method, configure service method here, and I do this. What does it mean? Wherever I have variable of type iEmailSender as a parameter to the constructor, framework is going to create object of email message handler and give it to that constructor. Let me do a proper example otherwise. So here I'm adding a class, let's say demo. And maybe demo we can replace with math, just for a proper example. And here I will have a public interface iMath. iMath will have integer add a comma b. iMath, and I want to implement that interface here and return a plus b. Simple. Now what I'm going to do is, in my startup I'll put here iMath comma math. What is the advantage of doing this? Wherever, let's say for example in my controller, In my controller, now I'm going to have an extra parameter to the constructor, which is iMath. And what I do with this iMath is now up to me. So here I can say something like math.add a comma b. So does the controller know? Let's say we'll hard code the value. Does the controller know that it is going to get a math object? No, it doesn't need to know. It is simply going to execute the add method and get us the result through the math object. So this is what is custom class registered for dependency injection. We get the result. And yes, internally it did call. I go back and use, let's say, step in 2. And it's coming to math class add method. So this is how dependency injection is implemented in ASP.NET Core. The interface and the class you write first, and whatever interface and class which you write, register them with the application services. And how are we registering them with the application services? We are doing that through configure service. And once registered with the application service, we can use this as parameter to the constructor of another class like a controller. But remember that class should not be something which we are going to create the instance. It is framework instantiable. So controller is not instantiated by us. So to controller, I can pass a parameter in the constructor iMath. Automatically, framework will ensure that object of math is going to be instantiated and given to it. So now we have to understand what is this transient. Add transient. Actually, there are three values. You can call it as add transient, add scoped, add singleton. Any one of these three can be used. Transient lifetime services are created each time they are requested. This lifetime works best for lightweight stateless services. So what I want to do now is show you that every time I move from, let's say I have this home controller. And I have person controller. In person controller also, I'm going to provide a constructor which is getting iMath. Now the question is, one request is going to come for home controller and another request will come for person controller. Are they both going to use the same object or are they going to use different object? That is the point we have to understand now. I repeat, if home controller receives a separate request from person controller, there are two different requests actually. So when there are two different requests, are they both going to get the same object or different object? This is going to depend on how is the object registered. So what I'll do is, only for the sake of demo, I'm adding here one property. Counter. And that counter I implement here. That's it. And every time I'm going to increment counter. Every time add method is called, or let's say the constructor is invoked, I'm going to increment counter. Now build the project. Successful. Now I will put a breakpoint in this. and I'm also going to put a breakpoint in this. Run it in debug mode. First, it will go to the home constructor. Object is created, and because object is created, you'll see the counter is 1 because constructor was executed and the value is 1. Good. Now I run it. After this, now I again go back to the browser, and now here I type person slash, I think the action method name is details. This is details. So that's why person slash details. Now what should be the value? You'll notice that the value right now is again 1 only. That means what? The object for home controller is different from a person controller. Home controller object was separately created and person controller object was separately created. There are two different objects completely for us. Same program, I just change now one thing, that is instead of add transient, I'll use now add singleton. That's it. I'm saying now it is add singleton. Again run the whole program in debug mode, fresh. First time it will send a request for home controller. And you'll see the value is 1. Very good. Continue. Now I'm going to send a request for person controller. A separate request. And you'll see now the value is 2. Oh, it's still 1. Oh, sorry. Yeah, because the constructor I have written. I should have actually done here. Some method I should call. Constructor is only executed once. So always it will be 1 only. So my mistake. The demo was wrong. But let me redo it now. So now in both hello controller, home controller and in person controller, I am calling the add method. What I want to show you is when we use singleton, we are going to get the value as 2, whereas when we say transient, the value is going to be 1 only. That's what I want to show actually. So rebuild the whole project. Right now it is this will be 1 right now. Add method was called. Continue. But now what is important is if I run this person controller slash details, it's going to be counter 2. Implies what? The same object which was used for home controller is used for person controller. The objects are not different. That means the same object is shared between different requests. And this is good as long as the objects are stateless. Now what is a stateless object? The one which does not have any field members like this. Those are stateless objects. Only functionality will be there. We don't mind invoking the functionality of those objects independently. For those kind of objects, singleton is a better option. So basically singleton implies what? Singleton is a very popular pattern also. Singleton actually implies that there is only one object created throughout. Yes. So singleton is an object which is instantiated and reused for all the requests either by same client or by different client. Mind you, even if I keep calling the method of same home controller again and again, if I keep calling the method of home controller, every time we are going to get the value incremented when it is singleton. First time I say continue, I go to browser, refresh. Second time I say continue, browser, refresh, and you'll notice that the value now is 3. Every time it increments. That is because it is singleton. It retains state. Whereas if it is not singleton and if it is transient, transient objects are short-lived. That means they are only lived for that injection. Every time it is injected, it's going to be a new object. I run in debug mode. The value is 1. Continue. Come back to browser, refresh. The value still will be 1 only. Because when it was injected first time, a new object was created. When it was injected second time, again a new object is created. Every time a new object is created whenever a injection is provided. It's not going to reuse the object. That's what is the meaning of transient. So what is scoped? Scoped is an object created for a request. See, here we have got home controller, but home controller might be using certain other objects. Say now what I'll do is, we have to do that. Little complicated example, but I'll try. So now what I'm going to do is, let's say I write one class, math operations, and math operations is going to get object of math. iMath. And this is calling add method. But what I'm going to do is math operations itself, I will register with application service. So I will write here services dot add scoped. Because it is class, I don't need to write interface comma class name. One is enough. Now once I give here add scoped, I can now use math operations in my controller. OP. So let us say this is scoped and this is transient. So math class I'm calling it as scoped and math operation I'm calling it as transient. So whenever math operations is injected, like in this particular case, math operation is injected, a new instance of this class is going to get created, and thus the constructor is going to be invoked. And constructor requires iMath. So I will also have here one more in some kind of thing. It's all dummy example just to explain you the concept. Invoke add. And here I'll move this. Little complicated though, but you should understand. Add is does not contain definition for add, no accessible, add accepting integer comma integer. let's change this to A1, A1, because this is already A. So what is that we are doing now? When a math operation object is created, iMath is getting injected into it. And on that math operation, I'm calling add method. Very important. So I'll place a breakpoint at the constructor. I'll place a breakpoint at the constructor. Okay. Now in home controller, I'm injecting math operation. I'm also injecting iMath. Both the things I'm injecting. Let's run this. And you'll notice it invoked constructor because iMath was injected. Run this. Math operation was injected. Run. And it did not again invoke the constructor of math. Constructor of math was invoked only once, that is for this. Though the constructor is injected in this place also. Here also it is injected. But still it did not invoke the constructor. That means it is using the same object. Why it is using the same object? Because here I have mentioned it as add scope. Let me change this. I change this to not transient. And what you will notice is, again I run the debug mode. For one request only, all this is for one request only. Math constructor got executed. That means one math object created. I run this and second. And then it goes to this. Two objects. Two times it executed math. Let me stop and run once again for you. Run. It came to math constructor. Right, I say step into. And now I again press continue. And it again came back to math constructor. Why? Every time math is injected, a new object is going to be created now. So again I repeat here the proper example. Transient implies lifetime services are created each time they are requested. That means every time they are used as parameter, a new object is going to be created for transient. Every time a parameter is added, a new object is created. Scoped. Lifetime service creates once per request. Once per request. So iMath will be created only once per request and same will be injected every other place iMath is used as parameter in the constructor. Singleton. Once for the lifetime of the application, first time only, and the same object is reused throughout by all the requests by all the users. Single object only will be used. So it is actually very dangerous to have singleton, especially if it is going to have data, because there is a very good possibility that you override data of one user with the other. So you have to take care of proper synchronization techniques when you are using singleton. Transient you don't have to worry about at all because there is no reusability of object. Scoped, only in a request lifetime it is reused, but subsequent request a new object is created. So transient only for a given injected container it is valid. Scoped, it is valid for all the containers where it is injected in a given request. Singleton, once created, permanently there. Knowing this, you will have to decide what type of service behavior is what you want. If you want a transient behavior, or you want a scoped behavior, or you want a singleton behavior, you have to decide that. I would request you to take this handout. I have taken from the documentation of Microsoft. Like I wrote iMath, here it is I operation. And they have taken different interface for each example. So I would request you to run this and notice how it is behaving. But explanation wise, Yes. Also remember, when you say singleton, you can directly create the object and give it. Instead of letting it to be created first time when it is used, you can create the object and pass the reference, and the same object is reused thereafter. That's what is singleton. Thread safety. Singleton services needs to be thread safe. If singleton service has dependency on transient service, the transient service may also need to be thread safe. If a singleton has dependency on transient, transient also should be thread safe, because transient is going to be reused with the singleton. So you have to be careful. So that's all about how we can scope the objects lifetime based on our requirements. Especially this is done for the services which we are going to inject in our controllers and various other places in the application. Right now we have learned it as a concept, and I'm going to use it extensively in all subsequent topics hereafter. That's all for today. Thank you.